the ANC's next elective conference is scheduled to take place in 2027. Before we get there, we have the next local government elections likely to take place at the end of 2026 or early 2027. And pertaining to the local government elections, as well as the ANC's elective conference, we have the state of the three major metros in Gauteng, namely Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni. Now, how are all these things related to each other? How do they impact on each other, if at all? Joining me to unpack and figure out all of these currents in development at the moment, we have Carika Middelberg, analyst at the CRA. Carika, thanks very much for your time once again here on the CRA YouTube channel. To start off with, you recently wrote and published a client note available to all our clients. We'll link to that in the description below for those interested. Just tell us a little bit about the current state of the three major metros in Gauteng, especially development since around 2016.
Yes, so since 2016, the three metros in Gauteng, like you said, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, and Johannesburg, are governed by local government coalitions. So since that time, there's been quite an intense change in mayorship in all three the metros. However, the metro that has been suffering the most is Johannesburg, who has had 10 mayors since 2016. So, that's like a mayor that can't stay even one full year. So that is quite concerning, especially if we consider the political dynamic around this. So a mayor is hired and he has a mayoral committee. And the mayoral committee, they are responsible for spatial planning, economics, infrastructure. So each time there's a new mayor, there's a new mayoral committee, and all these programs get impacted, which makes it difficult to implement long-term reforms.
And what do you think, just in terms of some of the priorities that need to be solved in some of the metros? So what are some of the things that jump to your mind first when you think about the coalition chaos or the changes in coalitions and mayors and how that manifests in day-to-day governance? So for those businesses, those citizens in these metros, where do you see the breakdown happening first in terms of municipal services?
So in all three the metros, there's quite a big problem with cash collection. So that means collecting electricity bills, water bills. So recently in the news, it's been quite well covered that the city of Johannesburg and other metros as well is in debt to Eskom, and with quite a few millions of rands. So that is very concerning, especially now that Eskom is on their new plan to incur their debt. So they've been very strict on these municipal bills and saying that they're going to cut off Johannesburg's power due to the significant debt they are in. So it's instances like that, electricity, and then also instances like infrastructure, especially in road infrastructure that we've seen that's been significantly declining around the province, and then also water infrastructure with institutions such as Rand Water and Johannesburg Water that has also been struggling. And then again, their infrastructure to parts of Johannesburg and Tshwane and Ekurhuleni, but then also again, the municipalities being in debt to those institutions.
And Carika, if we then shift a little bit to talking about the link between the changes in the three metros in Gauteng with the upcoming ANC elective conference. So one of the main individuals involved in the changes in Gauteng is the Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, of course, of the ANC, long-standing individual, built up quite a lot of influence in Gauteng specifically. So we look at the role he's played in some of these changes, the latest of which, of course, was the vote of no confidence in former Tshwane Mayor Celia Brink, which now, Tshwane now has a new mayor, Action SA's Nasipi Moya. If you look at someone like Mr. Lesufi, possibly, I think, setting himself up for that next ANC leadership or elective conference, what do you think of his prospects? And could you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the others that you've highlighted in your client note?
Yes, so in the client note, I examine the motion of no confidence against former Tshwane Mayor Silje Brink, and I put it through the lens of the impact of the ANC's leadership race on Gauteng. So like you said, the motion of no confidence against Mr. Silje Brink was in large part supported by Panyaza Lesufi as the Premier of Gauteng, and with him expressing very much anti-GNU sentiments, which is also reflected in the provincial politics of Gauteng, with them struggling to form a province of national unity. As we have seen in KZN, after the GNU, they formed the PNU. So there's quite a lot of political instability in Gauteng, especially now with the ousting of Silje Brink, and then again, like the constant mayoral changes. So we see this linking up between the ANC and now that's come forward the Action SA with Herman Mashaba, where he's made, quite a lot of waves in the politics of Johannesburg and Tshwane. So I do think this is a move by Premier Lesufi to strengthen politics, the ANC in provincial politics, especially if we consider their turnout. So I think this is definitely the party gearing themselves up for the local government elections in 2026, and then also the leadership conference in 2027. Even if Mr. Lesufi decides to not stand for 2027, I do think it is still a long-term development from him to establish himself as a senior leader within the party, to strengthen the ANC, to build up his track record as someone who has fought for the party and increased the party's presence and voter turnout, especially since the ANC has seen a significant decline in local government elections, and then now obviously this year the national and provincial elections.
So Carika, we have a bit of a development of two maybe streams. So one, those within the ANC more opposed to the ANC working in the GNU, specifically with a party like the DA. So those individuals and groups within the ANC, and I think within the wider alliance, might then coalesce around someone like Premier Panyaza Lesufi, who can be the standard bearer for concerns and issues with the ANC being in the GNU, and maybe they feel that's the wrong route. On the other hand, you'll have individuals who could put up their hand to be next ANC leader after President Ramaphosa, who feel it's to the party's benefit and to the country's benefit to remain in the GNU, to continue being in government. So who are some of the other names in consideration for the next ANC president?
Yeah, so at this stage, it is still very open-ended, as a lot of leaders have come forth and said there are no presidential campaigning as of yet, as the party is still focusing on the disastrous turnout they had to rebuild the ANC. But some of the individuals I have this far identified are Deputy President Paul Mashatile. The reason for this is historically the Deputy President of the ANC oftentimes becomes the President of the party as well. Like, for example, Cyril Ramaphosa was Deputy President, Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki were all Deputy President of the party before they became President of the party. However, there are some contentions about him becoming the President, but I do think it is still a possibility that we cannot shoot down as of yet. And then there is Minister of International Relations and Cooperations, Ronald Lamola. So by appointing him as Minister of Foreign Affairs, this is largely interpreted as testing of his leadership to prepare him for the possibility of becoming party president. And then there are also other names such as Gwede Mantashe, who I did not highlight in the client note, but is also a big name to be considered, especially his role that he's played within the ANC. And I think his institutional leadership also makes him quite a strong contender. And then also Fikile Mbalula, who is the party Secretary General. So he is definitely starting to display himself more as a presidential candidate, becoming more serious and definitely trying to enforce discipline and stability within the party, especially as we have seen with the incident with Mr. Lesufi about his alleged anti-GNU sentiment where Mr. Mbalula summoned him for a disciplinary hearing. So I definitely think he's also trying to bolster his institutional capacity to maybe set himself up for party president.
Yeah, I think we've already seen from the Secretary General the shift in rhetoric and how he's engaged in the public, just leading up into the elections and afterwards in the negotiations around the GNU versus how he acted and behaved in many different ways before. And so fascinating, I think, and things will just continue to develop as we head towards the next local government elections and next ANC conference. And of course, within that wider context, you have, I think, within the MK party, within Umkhonto we Sizwe, for people like former President Jacob Zuma, playing the longer term game towards 2027 to see how they can influence things within the ANC, where there will be those who think maybe the MK party is the way to restore the ANC, as it were. So that also, I think, for the ANC leadership, something very much to deal with and consider. And then within all of that wider context, you have service delivery breakdowns in Gauteng. So will the politicians in these different coalitions, with their own interests in mind over the long term, what decisions will they make to ensure better service delivery, to shore up their voter support in Gauteng? The ANC, of course, not just declining nationally, but declining quite radically in Gauteng as well in terms of its vote share. So quite a lot of work needing to be done on the part of people like Premier Lesufi and others. But we'll end on that note. I'm sure we'll be able to write and talk a lot about this particular issue in Gauteng going forward. So Carika, thanks once again for your time, for all of you for watching. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you all again very soon. Bye-bye.